yesterday we kind of looked generally at what prophecy is in the Old Testament, okay, in the Hebrew Bible for these prophets, right? And we kind of especially focused in on the former prophets, right? Now the former prophets, you guys remember our three sections of the Hebrew Bible?
The Torah, the
Torah, the Naviim, right, the prophets, and the Ketuvim, right? The Torah is which books is which? The Torah is which books? Good. So Genesis through. Good. Okay. That means the Nevi'im starts with which book? Good.
Through 2 Kings.
Through Kings, right? This section, Joshua through, we can call 2 Kings, is referred to as the former prophets.
Former prophet.
Okay. So what we refer to as the Deuteronomistic history can also be referred to as the former prophets, right? And then after that, right, we have the latter prophets. And this is what we'll be turning to with your projects, right? Sometimes these get referred to as the writing prophets or the written prophets, right? Because these are prophets that we have books for, right? Isaiah, Jeremiah, and so on. And I want to go back to a question that got asked last Wednesday about which, how did people know which prophets to listen to, right? And I said, well, if they were right. And that could be partly true. I think maybe a better answer would be, because I think my answer to that kind of still makes it sound like, well, if the thing they said about the future comes true, then they're a prophet to be listened to. But if we kind of reshape our thinking of what a prophet is as someone who speaks into a situation, into a concrete situation, who has been given some kind of divine insight into a situation, it's more likely that those prophets are remembered who kind of years down the road, people are like, oh man, Jeremiah was right. Right? We see from hindsight, and the saying hindsight's 20/20, right? Apparently this prophet in his present time had 20/20 vision, and it's only now that we're looking in hindsight that we can say, oh, Jeremiah was right. Right? Oh, Jeremiah was not right in what he predicted, but he was right in how he was assessing the situation. Does that make sense? So think of, not to get too trivial, but think if you're in a relationship and it falls apart, right? And you had kind of met with friends, and some of your friends had given you advice and you thought they were all wrong. The relationship fell apart, and then like a year down the road, you're like, you get into another fight in another relationship, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is just like that. I finally see why this relationship fell apart. That friend was right. Right? That friend who told me if I keep acting in these kinds of ways, our relationship's going to end. It wasn't that he was prophetic in saying the relationship would end. He was right in that he had a good vision, good insight into what the situation was. Right? And my guess would be this is why we have certain prophetic books still contained in the canon. Because the Jewish people looking back said, these particular people had very keen insight into those situations. Does that kind of give a clear picture of why we might have some of these?
Wait, I have a question again.
Yeah.
What did you say, the Ketuvim?
Ketuvim, okay, yeah, this is
what
just
prophets are those?
Yeah, and we haven't gotten to them yet.
Okay.
Kind of the last section we'll get to. Yeah.
So the
Nevi'im.
Nevi'im is the former prophets and the latter prophets. Okay.
Right, yeah. So, and just as kind of a reminder, the book of Daniel is down here. He's not included with the Nevi'im. Okay, and we'll talk about why that is on the very last day of class, because that's when we get to Daniel.
Really?
Yep. Okay. So, these latter prophets that we're talking about range from about, let me make sure I get my dates right. So we're going to come up here to latter prophets. I'm going to clear some space. We're talking generally about 750 to 340 BCE.
For the latter.
It's kind of 430. My bad. Getting a little dyslexic.
For the latter prophets.
Yeah, for the latter prophets. This is generally the time frame we're going to be looking at. Okay, 750 to 430 BC is kind of the time frame that we're going to be dealing with the latter prophets that you all are doing your reports on. And what we'll see is that each of them are responding to 4 kind of major crises or movements of the time. So the first crises, think back to 722 is what?
Oh,
722.
it's,
Solomon dies and
Are you thinking 922?
no, it's the fall of the north.
Right.
Assyria takes over the north.
The first major the first major crisis that we'll be looking at is the Assyrian invasion. Right? We'll see it in the north. The northern prophets will address this with people like Amos and Hosea. And we'll see southern prophets talk about it. With Isaiah. And so Amos and Hosea are in the north. Isaiah will deal with the same crisis in the south. The next one, 586, who do we have?
The fall of the south by the Babylonians.
Good. So the next one is the Babylonian crisis. Right? We can call these crises too. I mean, invasion works too, but I like crisis because it's happening like, what do we do with these people coming in? Right? So the Assyrian crisis and the Babylonian crisis. Now, is anybody in the north going to talk about the Babylonian crisis?
Probably not.
Why not?
Because they're already taken over by
Yeah,
the
because they're not there anymore. Exactly. So we're going to get our southern prophets here. This is going to be people like Jeremiah, right? Habakkuk's in here too, and there's some others. Okay. So here's our crisis number 1, crisis number 2. Crisis number 3 is going to be prophets in exile. And the latter half of Jeremiah kind of ties into this, but then we also see Ezekiel as being one of the major prophets of the exile. And finally, we have the prophets of the return, right? Coming back.
I'm sorry, you said the prophets?
Prophets of the return, right? The restoration, right? And this is where we get prophets like Ezra and Nehemiah and Zechariah and Malachi, are when the people from outside of Israel who have been taken into exile come back. And what's interesting, if you're doing one of these books, is you're probably noting a conflict that's arising between the people who never got exiled, the lower classes, and the upper classes and the priestly classes who did get thrown out and then are now coming back. So you have this conflict between these two groups during the return. It's not just like, oh, everybody's back, yeah, let's throw a party. Right? It's like, whose land is this really? Whose religion is this really? Right? So we'll see conflict there too. So these are kind of the 4 major crises that we'll be walking through for the next 2 weeks. Okay? Now the last thing I want to do is have us look or think a little bit about the prophetic form. Okay? And the first thing we need to know about the prophetic form is that it is incredibly figurative. What do I mean by figurative? Yeah, it's figurative. It's not literal. There's a lot of symbolism. Right? We'll see this symbolism with numbers, with animals, with creatures, with people, with names. Right? We'll need to be very careful when we're looking at prophetic literature to not take things too literally. Right? For example, we may have prophets talking about locust invasions. Right? Is this locust invasion actually a natural event that the prophet is talking about, or is he talking about an invading army? Right? Think about what locusts do. Locusts move into an area, completely destroy the crops, and then leave. Right? Might that be some kind of symbolism for an invading army coming in, wiping out the crops, and leaving? right? So we need to be really careful about that. They also have they're not just figurative and symbolic in their speech. I'm going to kind of erase this. But we also have figurative and symbolic actions, right? We'll have prophets laying on their side for so many years, prophets cooking their food over their own feces, right? Yep.
What book is that in? Are you sure that's in there?
Huh?
Are you sure that's in there?
Oh, I'm very sure.
I've read this book some time.
So again, just kind of exercising caution when we're reading these things, recognizing that for the prophets, they are very much operating in this space, right? Communicating through imagery, right? And through actions, that all of this carries symbols. Now, I'm going to, unfortunately, I wrote this too close to the projector, because I want to show you what happens. And I looked so long to find this, and I was so happy when I did. Not that I knew of this specifically, but I was just looking for a good example of when somebody tries to do, tries to analyze the text in a way that the text just does not work. So if we want to get the lights, this video is kind of dim and not that great, but I think you'll get the idea. Can we get one more?
Are you talking about Ezekiel?
Yeah, I think this actually, this is in Ezekiel. Yeah, so here we go. Let's see here. Okay, like I said, you don't really have to see, just kind of like listen to what's being, oh, okay.
Oh no, is this
All right.
a preacher doing this?
Yeah, well this is, I don't even know where this speech is going on. I'm really worried because a couple times he makes a comment about, he kind of references that people might in the audience be in positions of authority, which really worries me. But anyways, we'll just give a listen.
Okay, turn up.
I want to say nuclear weapons. Well, first of all, Ezekiel tells us that the leftover weapons from this battle that God intervenes will provide all the energy needs for Israel for 7 years. And if you read J.A. Stice and some of the commentators that wrote back in, say, the 1860s, they think that must be symbolic because nothing can burn for 7 years. And we smile at that today. What weapons technology could easily provide all the energy needs of Israel for 7 years? Nuclear, of course. There are contracts that have been led to convert weapons-grade material to reactor material. But Ezekiel goes on, he says they hire professionals to clear the battlefield. The King James says they sever out men of continual employment. What does that mean? I suggest it's professional. And they wait 7 months before entering the area, then they take 7 months to clear the area, and what they find, they bury east of the Dead Sea, right? Read that downwind. That sound technically provocative? Ezekiel isn't through. He says if a traveler finds something that the professionals have missed, he doesn't touch it. He puts a sign by it and lets the professionals deal with it. Now you guys who have been briefed on nuclear, biological, chemical warfare, you know the drill. This is very contemporary procedure to have been written 2,550 years ago. Well, let's talk about Russia. They're returning to authoritarian rule. Putin has said that dictators have always been good for Russia, referring to Peter the Great and others. There's a renewed nationalism. They're renovating, while we're disabling ours, they're renovating their nuclear forces, upgrading their missiles, upgrading their defenses. Their hardened headquarters are being expanded. And they're aligning itself with Israel's enemies. They signed a pact with Iran in February for mutual assistance and a whole bunch of other things. We'll come back to that from the other side. So the experts that look at this believe it's imminent.
It's imminent.
So who is this and where is this?
Okay, well, this is a guy named Chuck Missler. I know nothing about him. I was skimming through trying to find short clips that I can show. I didn't want to sit here and let you guys sit through a 34-minute video of why somebody thinks a biblical reference to Gog or Magog is Russia, because Russia existed. But I'm going to pull up this passage that he has just so well, exegeted for us. So let's turn to, oh man. Okay, Ezekiel 39 here. We're going to come down here to verse 11. let's see, is this where I want to go? Maybe a little, hold on, let me see here. Here we go, verse 9. Then those who live in towns of Israel will go out. So this is after the war is over, right? The war is over. God has given victory to the Israelites. And this is what Ezekiel sees. He says, then those who live in the towns of Israel will go out and use the weapons for fuel and burn them up. The small and the large shields, the bows and the arrows, the war clubs and spears. For 7 years they would use them for fuel. They will not need to gather wood from the fields or cut it from the forest, because they will use the weapons for fuel. And they will plunder those who plundered them and loot those who looted them, declares the sovereign Lord. Okay, let's stop right here. How could they use these weapons for fuel?
Burn their wood.
Because they're made of wood, right? Makes a whole lot of sense, right? We don't have to go turn to nuclear weapons to explain why they are taking their weapons and using them for fuel, because everything in this time is wood or steel. And then you just take the steel part off the handle and use the handle, right? This whole idea of 7 years. What do you think he's getting for there? Getting out
It's
there?
like the whole perfect godly number or something.
Yeah, there's this number of completion, of wholeness, right?
Yeah.
Because what's happening here, we're burning up spears and weapons and shields because we don't need them anymore. There will be no more war. Right? This is what Ezekiel is communicating, not just that this one war is over, but that all wars are over. We can just burn everything that we had, right? Because we don't need it. And we burn it for 7 years, this kind of number of completion and wholeness, right? Creation in 7 days. These kinds of numbers, right? This is a very symbolic number. It's not that we literally have enough shields to burn for 7 years, right? This is symbolic, figurative language that's communicating something much more deep, much more meaningful for Ezekiel's audience than just, oh, okay, we're going to have enough for 7. Well, we should plan for 8 then, right, for the 8th year. Right, because they don't need to gather wood, so on and so forth. This next little part, right, on that day, I'll give Gog a burial place in Israel, right? Everybody's going to die there. In the valley, so forth, I will block travelers, so on. For 7 months, this is his next little section about, you know, for him saying, oh, there's going to be this like nuclear residue everywhere, right?
Fallout.
Yeah. For 7 months, the Israelites will be burying them in order to cleanse the land. All the people will bury them, blah, blah, blah. After the 7 months, they will carry out a more detailed search as they go through the land. Anyone who sees a human bone will leave a marker beside it for the grave diggers, until the grave diggers bury it in the land of Ham and so forth. Where's the part? All the people people will be continually employed in cleansing the land. They will spread out across the land along with others. They will bury any bodies that are lying on the ground. Okay, good. What? And so they will cleanse the land. Right? What's kind of perking your ears up with this passage? What idea, maybe?
Continuously employed. Health and professionals.
Okay, why would you need professionals to cleanse the land?
It does it itself.
Not to touch the dead bodies.
Yeah, because
Yeah, think back to what we know about Israelite holiness codes and purity codes and cleanliness, right? This idea that if you touch a dead body, you are ritually unclean. You cannot participate in worship, right? This is why we need a certain group of people to do this.
Were those professionals Jews or no?
Well, again, this is him kind of like, you know, projecting a kind of future. But yes, these would be Jews, right? Some people from the land who kind of have this specific purpose, right? Maybe some kind of, I mean, Ezekiel's not going to go into any kind of great lengths here to say, and the people who are tasked with burying bodies will do this and this and this to be ritually clean. But he's saying, look, you're going to have to cleanse the land because there's going to be all these dead bodies because you just so decimated this enemy, right? That you're going to have to like make the land holy again. You can't leave all these dead bodies laying around because that makes Israel, the land that's supposed to be set aside and ritually pure for Yahweh, it makes the land unclean. So you need people to go through and cleanse it, right? So you see, like once we have an understanding of like the meaning and the kind of symbolism of cleanliness and of 7 and things like this, we don't need to like explain this away with nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. And then the frustrating part for me is that what that does to this text then is almost to say that the people that Ezekiel is speaking this to are just like, I guess we'll write this down. I mean, nuclear weapons aren't for another, 2.5 centuries. We'll write it down because, surely they'll use it then. Right? This had meaning for the people Ezekiel was speaking to. Okay? and this is kind of a good thing to remember, and we can turn the lights on if we want, is that I've seen in past reports, prophet reports, where people say that their prophet is more concerned with the spirituality of the people than of any kind of political thing, right? But again, what's really important to remember is that we can't separate these things for the prophet, right? What happens politically happens because of the spiritual nature of what's going on in the land, right? Now, whether the prophet's going to say that the spiritual thing that's gone awry is apostasy and idolatry, or whether they're going to say it's injustice and oppression, is going to differ prophet by prophet, right? But they're going to say that these political things are happening because of the spiritual nature of things, right? The spiritual sickness of Israel is bringing on these political results. And so we can't say that the prophet doesn't care about the politics, right? We'll have some prophets say, look, you can't form an alliance with other nations, right? If you form an alliance with another nation, that's you not relying on God, right? So that's a very political message, right? Which brings me to another point that I think a lot of times people get confused about when doing these prophet projects, is the difference between a prophet's message and their theology, right? Let's take that last one for example. Don't form alliances with other nations. That's a message. The underlying theology of that is because it's you turning your back on Yahweh, right? That's the message the theology that's under that message. If I said everybody should get rid of their cars and only have bicycles, that would be my message. My theology behind it would be, I think pollution's an awful thing and it'll make us a healthier nation, right? So this is kind of an example of how you can kind of differentiate between the message of your prophet and the theology of your prophet. Okay?
Now, that guy, I can't say I agree or disagree with him, whatever. I mean, he's kind of out there, I think. But I can kind of see what he's trying to say, though. I think what he's trying to say is that, yes, what they wrote down back then applied to them, but it can also be applied today. I think that's what, I don't know. That's just how it came off to me. That he's saying it was true for them, but he can also see how it could be true in the future with nuclear weapons.
Right. And that's something that we'll just, that we're not really going to tackle in this class, like how prophecies can be, or could they be relevant multiple times.
Yeah.
But here's something I do want to say, is that, and this is why I've stressed kind of exegesis so much, is because so much of the time people see the text and then they jump all the way to application.
Yes.
Right. Without understanding all the context that's in the middle that needs to inform, if you want to do application with the text, you have to move through the context of it.
He's just jumping.
And he's just jumping.
But I'm just saying I see where he was trying to go.
I don't know, he sounds like he full of assumptions. I assume, I think this is...
Yeah. And so that's the thing. That's why we're taking the kind of approach we are with anything, right? If the Hebrew Bible is a text that is meaningful spiritually for you, then application is, of course, something you will do with it, that you will use it for. But whether it's relevant or not to you, understanding its context is going to be necessary, if it's for application or if it's just for understanding it as a text on its own, right? You have to understand where the prophet's coming to, what he's really saying, because what I think his interpretation loses here is that Ezekiel is saying this is an end to all war, right? If he's talking about like, oh, it's going to take, 7, that nuclear fuel can last for 7 years, yeah, it's great, but then you miss the idea that like, we burned everything because we don't need anything, right? And this idea of cleanliness, this theological point of cleanliness, he misses as well, because he makes it about nuclear, cleansing or whatever. So if you're going to do application with the text, I think it's very important to understand kind of the initial message.
Yeah, I'm not saying he did it right. I just, I feel for him. He's trying.
Okay, the last thing I want to do before we kind of move on to letting you work a little bit with these books is talk about 3 main forms. And I'll kind of go quickly through these. I was going to split us up and look at them individually, but I know you guys would like a chance to look at these books. So the first one, we have three kind of big forms that we're going to look at in the prophetic books, right? And the first one is a lawsuit oracle.
So there's nothing else with the figurative?
Is it prophetic?
The figurative is through all of it,
Oh, okay.
right? It's kind of a means of speaking that's employed in all of these different major forms.
This is with the prophetic forms, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first one's a lawsuit oracle. And the way to recognize these in your text is if you have God being the plaintiff, the prosecuting attorney, and the judge. Right? And God brings a lawsuit. He brings a suit against the nation of Israel because they've transgressed the covenant. Right? They've broken the covenant agreement. And God is going to bring them to court for breaking this agreement. Right? And God will say, or more precisely, I guess, we'll hear the prophets say, thus says the Lord, I have a suit against Israel. Right? And then we'll start going into that form. Right? And you'll see, it gets fairly detailed, this kind of form. There's a summons, a charge, evidence is brought, there's a verdict. And sometimes these are implied more than specific, but we'll see all of it. If you want to have a reference, Isaiah 3 will give you a good look at what this looks like. I think specifically 13 to 26 will give you a good picture of what a lawsuit oracle looks like.
And you said
Huh? What were we saying?
You said God was prosecutor, judge, and
Attorney.
An attorney,
oh,
yeah.
yes.
He's the plaintiff, right? Yeah, plaintiff's the other one you're looking for. The plaintiff, the prosecuting attorney, and the judge. Whereas you have Israel being the defendant, right? The one who's charged.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And you said it was a summons, a charge, and
Yeah, there'll be a summons, a charge, evidence,
a
and a verdict. Right? And the verdict can be everything from disease to famine to bringing other nations in as punishment. Right? So you can have a lot of kind of a range of punishments based on the lawsuit oracle. The second one is a woe oracle. These are really easy to pick out
Oh, yeah.
because they usually start with woe,
Whoa.
right?
What will I say?
Yeah. In Hebrew, it's oi, right? So if you've heard oy vey, that's, yeah, right. The word oi in Hebrew is woe, or backwards. But yeah, so we have the woe oracle, and the woe is kind of like speaking of like there is going to be some kind of distress. Okay, so you have some kind of announcement of distress. So woe to you. Woe to you, O Judah, you will be crushed under a Ferris wheel. I don't know. Right?
It's basically a warning.
Yeah. It's saying you're going to suffer this distress. This awful thing is going to happen. So kind of this warning. Yeah. And you can kind of think of woe oracles as kind of predictions of doom. Now remember, even these predictions of doom are linked to the present, right? It's because you're doing this awful thing that this kind of doom is going to come upon you, right? And if you want a reference for this one, you can look to Habakkuk. I think it's Habakkuk or Habakkuk. People pronounce it different ways. Chapter 2, verses 6 through 8 will give you kind of a good visualization of what that looks like. Okay. But these are just good examples. You will find most of these forms in every prophetic book. I'm not saying that the woe oracle is only found in Habakkuk or anything. And finally, we do find happy ones. We do have salvation oracles. Right. Or a promise oracle, right? And these kind of like the woes kind of refer to some future event, but it's a future restoration.
Salvation is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a future restoration. There's going to be some kind of radical change, some kind of blessing that Yahweh is going to pour out on his people. And we can see this, for example, in Amos 9:11-15. Would be a good place to look to see what a promise or salvation oracle looks like. And there's a lot of other kind of forms. There's different kinds of oracles. There's different kinds of salvation oracles. But as far as like kind of major forms that you're going to encounter, these are three big ones.